Well, hello, my awesome apes students. This is Dr. Griffith, and I'm going to tell you about fisheries today. So, in your notes, page 23 in the packet, this is Unit 5.8. It's on the impacts of overfishing, Module 32. And let's get started. Okay, so fisheries, which is what you're writing down. So fisheries are commercially harvestable populations of fish within a particular ecological region. And so the three bullet points that you're going to write down under that are: in Asia and Africa, fish comprise almost all of the consumed animal protein. Okay, so this is currently in November of 2020, that fish is the main amount of protein that comes in. And so things are shifting a little bit, but that's how things stand right now. There's a rapid increase in farmed fish production, and there's a decrease in the wild fish caught in the world's oceans. All right, so pause that if you need a minute to write those things down. So, good old tragedy of the commons, right? We keep coming back to this. So, especially the ocean, there's no incentive to protect or replenish fish stocks because the fish in the open ocean don't belong to any nation. So, there's been a precipitous decline in the ocean stocks of fish. So, this is the tragedy of the commons that you're writing down there. So fish collapse, there's been a decline of the fish population by 90% or more. 30% of the world's fisheries have collapsed. And you can kind of see this as it relates to over time, the collapsed taxa, the different species that have collapsed here, have been increasing over time. Collapse in species have been increasing. So we're losing species diversity in our oceans because we're eating so much fish. There's global trends in the state of the world marine fish stocks. So from 1974 to 2015, you can see that things have been overfished. They've been, some groups have been minimally fished, and then the amount that have been underfished has been falling. So basically, we're having a shift from underfishing to overfishing. And this is biologically sustainable, and this is unsustainable. So modern harvesting methods will include a few different things. So factory ships can catch, process, and freeze at sea without returning for months. So people got on these boats and they don't come back for a very long time. And they can just do the whole operations all on this one, on these giant fishing ships. And the next kind is trawling, drag nets, and long lines. So they trawl behind them these big, gigantic nets. And they have long, long lines that are used to catch fish. So long lining operations will send out a very long, like miles long line to catch fish, and then they'll just bring them all in. So it's a much more efficient way because you can grab lots of fish all at once. The other way is to do spotter planes and sonar. So with the advent of technologies like this, you can just have a sonar and look and be like, hey, there's all the fish, and then go over there and scoop them all up. So you may have seen these kinds of things on shows like The Deadliest Catch, which is all about getting crab. I love watching that show. It's fascinating. But they're even though it's still challenging, you have to be a good fisher person. This makes it much more efficient. So we're able to deplete the fishing stocks by being so efficient and good at fishing. And so now there's the environmental damage. One of the things in Garrett Hardin's article, The Tragedy of the Commons, that we talked about it, that's kind of controversial. One of the ways that he starts that off is that the overpopulation problem doesn't have a technical solution. It requires a fundamental extension in morality. So the technical solution would be, if you can catch fish better, you'll have less of a tragedy of the commons. But it's exactly the opposite. We are super good technically at catching fish. we have to choose to leave some of those fish there so that they are not depleted forever. And that's more of what Ostrom was talking about in her PhD winning economy ideas about the tragedy of the commons. Okay, so we have to make good choices to preserve these stocks. So here's the environmental damage: the destruction of the seafloor habitat. So coral reefs and seagrasses are damaged by these kinds of grabbing things from the bottom and scraping them along. It breaks up the coral and then rips out the seagrass. Then another big problem is the bycatch, which, so when you grab up all these things, just like with gigantic nets, you catch things by mistake, like the babies of the species and then the non-target species. So say you were trying to catch these fish, but you also get some starfish and some rays and some crab. So you're trying to catch one thing, but you catch other things by mistake, and that's bycatch, because the juveniles you can't have those because they're not big enough yet, and that really deplenishes a stock. So one of the things that that's gotten a lot of press is the endangerment of turtles by these fishing methods. So these large, gorgeous sea turtles that don't need to be killed. Nobody wants to eat them. I don't think. I'm not sure if anybody eats sea turtles. But what they've made are these turtle exclusion devices. So it's called a TED. It's not a TED Talk or my brother-in-law TED. It's a turtle exclusion device. So that's what you're writing for. What is a TED? And so we save turtles and still allow you to catch fish. And so one of the big ways that turtle were getting caught were in these shrimp trawlers. So they'd take a net. The net would be hanging off the side, and they just like go scoop, 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 and grab everything. And they were taking in turtles along the way in particular. And this happens for all kinds of different species. So the shrimp and turtles are scooped up by the net, but then the turtle can come down here and just come right on out, whereas the shrimp all go in there, and that's what they're trying to catch, and they're legally catching, and so that they can still legally catch fish without destroying the turtles. So this is an example of where technology can help us avoid the tragedy of the commons. So the next thing is to talk about these fish choices. So there's best choices, good alternatives, and to avoid. So these come in these little threefold packets. Monterey Bay Aquarium hands these out. So and they're updated and changed all the time. So you can look this up online, the best choices for the types of fish to eat that are the best for the environment. So you can see this list of the kinds of things that you should eat and the kinds of things you shouldn't eat. So for example, you can't just say, oh, I'm eating salmon, so I'm good for the environment. If you get salmon from Alaska or New Zealand, that's good for the environment. If you get salmon from Canada, California, Oregon, or wild in Washington, then that's a good alternative. But salmon from the Atlantic that's farmed is bad for the environment. So it's not just about the fish, but where the fish came from and how the fish was raised, and so these are all things that we should try to avoid if we're trying to eat well for the environment. And then these are things that'd be the best to eat. Now, this is hard to do, and lots of these best choices can be extremely expensive. Oh, I wanted to point out also that it's not that farmed fish is always good or bad. Like the Arctic char farmed is a good choice, but there's plenty of farmed kinds of fish that are not good choices. So that's why you have to have the list, because you can't memorize it all, and it does change. And you just try to do your best. So perhaps this is something when you guys are writing your recipes for that part of the assignment, where you're making our environmentally friendly or the earth friendly cookbook. If you're doing some kind of a fish, you'd want to make sure that it was on the best choices list. Okay. So now this is an activity that you're going to do. It's the fishing interactive. Okay. It's right here on your lecture notes. Oh, sorry, I'm not pointing at the right thing. Anyway, on page 24, fishing interactive, you're going to go to this fishing interactive, and then you click through, and little things are going to come in and fly out, and then you're going to read and talk about the types of fishing and the negative impacts, those 3 types of fishing with their negative impacts. Okay. We're going to skip the next article on page 24 this time around. And then you guys are going to do the article, the interactive National Geographic article called Feeding 9 Billion, with the guided questions there. And then that's going to deal with most of the food part of land and water use here. And then we're going to move on to mining next. Thanks for listening.